Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
I'm doing well,
Good.
and hopefully we will help make the world a better place.
Let's hope so.
That's a nice goal, but sometimes I wonder how much are we achieving? But indirectly, we might pretend that we had something to do with the good news we're going to talk about today.
Yeah.
At least we find out they're moving in the direction we're talking about, but quite frankly, I don't think those who make big decisions pay a whole lot of attention to it. But who knows? Ideas have consequences and depends on where they come from. What I want to talk about is what's going on in Korea. You know, we talked about before. Why can't they let them play games? Why can't North Korea participate in the Olympic Games? Why do we, the United States, prevent the South Koreans from talking and negotiating with the North Koreans? And why do we have to threaten and all this intimidation and sanctions and everything that's going on? And lo and behold, guess what happened? You know, right now the negotiations are going on. They say they're very, very serious, and people are optimistic about it. And the North will take a team down to South Korea, and that sounds very good. So people are optimistic, and the best part of it is Donald Trump's all for it. He's always been for negotiation, and he takes all the credit for it, which is okay with me. I really don't care who gets the credit, but but the interesting thing is these negotiations are very, very important. But we don't have any direct involvement in it, which we should be happy with that. We shouldn't be on the very, always say, oh no, they need us and we are the kingmakers and these won't work because we're not there. Maybe there's just the chance that they will go a little bit better without us being there. So I was delighted to hear this news. I'm sure you weren't disappointed to hear what was happening in Korea these days.
Well, it's always nice to be able to do a good news story. I think this is a good news story. We're always kind of doom and gloom in a way. But they had 12 hours of negotiations earlier today. Obviously, they're ahead of us because they're on the other side of the earth. But they had 12 hours of negotiations. High-level team met on the border of the countries. Basically, 4 things came out of it, all 4 being very encouraging and positive. First of all, North Korea will send athletes and high-level delegation to the Winter Olympics in South Korea next month. That's good. They also agreed to follow up with bilateral talks to relieve military tensions on the peninsula. That's great. 3, the 2 countries agreed to resolve, quote, this is an interesting quote, resolve national problems on our own. The 2 countries agreed. And then they're going to resume temporary union of families that were divided by the war. So those are the 4 outcomes, much better than some expected, certainly probably better than the U.S. wished.
I'm glad they backed off. The United States backed off on the preconditions. You will do A, B, C, then you can talk with us, and we'll negotiate with you. No, that has been suspended. Also, they have suspended, for who knows how long, any type of military demonstrations on there, the drills. And that is good, too. That's another good sign. And I think it's great that the United States has been doing this and saying that, yes, we will endorse it. Trump is all for this now. But not everybody in the administration is for this. All of a sudden, the hardcore, you're hearing from it wouldn't be so bad if there were people outside the administration. But obviously, the fact that who speaks for the administration, sometimes it gets a little bit confusing. So there's a couple people. Mattis, I think, he had expressed some concerns about what was going on, as well as Pompeo.
Yeah, well, Mattis, this was just as recently as the end of last week. He swore that these talks between North and South are only about the Olympics. He said, quote, the sum total of the subjects that are going to be discussed today are the Olympics only. He swore that North Korea would not be allowed to drive a wedge between the U.S. alliance with South Korea. Well, that may not have happened, but obviously they talked about more than just the Olympics. I don't know why it seems like he felt threatened, the U.S. feels threatened if they discuss other things. But they almost, as we talked about last week, I think when we discussed the potential for talks, that the U.S. almost has become irrelevant. And I think that's a natural thing because these are the two countries that are most affected by the tensions.
You know, I heard on a regular newscast yesterday or even this morning explaining the logic of why UN wants nuclear weapons. You know, the fact that those who removed their nuclear weapons, like Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi, you know what happened to them. And they say this is logical. So they were throwing that out as trying to understand this. But the people often ask, well, what would happen, you know, if they don't agree to get rid of their nukes? I think getting rid of the nukes is very, very important. It'd be great. But, you know, I actually don't see it as the end of the world, you know. But I think the incentive would be removed if we're not threatening. They want nukes because it's their backup. But Pakistan has them. That can't be one of our best, closest, trustworthy allies.
It's getting a lot worse with them lately.
And here we have India and Pakistan. They confront each other, and maybe there's less fighting because they both have them. I don't want that to be used as an argument. Oh, if everybody had nukes, there wouldn't be any fighting. But under certain conditions, that was probably helpful in the Cold War. You know, the fact that the Soviets had them and we had them, and we survived it all. Matter of fact, the Soviet system was totally defeated by their own means. You know, it was a system that didn't work. But we didn't have to get into a confrontation. So that isn't the whole thing. I think if you remove the incentive, you're going to more likely move in that direction. And the incentive, obviously, is that they aren't trusting us not to deal with them because we keep saying, you know, do it our way and do this, and you can't talk. You know, we set all the rules and regulations. So there's signs here. This is some good news, and I hope Donald Trump sticks with his position now because he says this is good. I will talk to on any time. I'm all for this. I've never been against that. Oh, what else do we need? I mean, we're on the road to great things happening.
Well, hopefully. But the one thing that it does call, I mean, the big wild card here, the big question mark I would have is how far President Moon of South Korea is willing to go to defy the pressure that I'm sure he's getting, the pushback he's getting from Washington. Hey, don't get too close. Don't mess up our bargaining chips. So how tough he's going to be on that is important. But the one thing that I think this makes less likely is something we saw smattering around the last week or so, is that the Pentagon is planning for a bloody nose strike on North Korea, which is if they launch something, we'll come in and take out a specific launch site or a specific military facility and then cross our fingers that they don't retaliate and kill 1 million people. It's a huge question mark, but this is what they were floating around, perhaps opening this door a little bit. You know, I mean, how the Soviet Union collapsed, it just all of a sudden collapsed. And sometimes these things just collapse, and so maybe the tension will just collapse after this starts.
And you know, it's good that North and South are talking to each other. They suspended the sanctions against some North Korean dignitaries and officials and all, and they can all come there. I think that's great. See how South Korea differs from North Korea. I think this is all very good. But you know, if they come to some agreement, we're not going to be content to not be a participant. One way or the other, you know, we have the big stuff and we're going to have to tell them, you know, exactly what's going on. So they'd have to be, for North Korea to be motivated, they have to have a little bit of trust in what we say or what we're backing up. I think they have more trust in South Korea than they will with us because they'll say, oh, well, we just witnessed what Obama did in Iran, you know, and there's an agreement. It's under the UN. There's UN inspectors. They have never violated it. And yet our government's taken the position that it can't work. They either have to do this or this. And so it's a matter of trust. But when they look at this and say, well, look how you turned, you know, on the Iranians, even though there's been nobody has proven that they've done anything to violate the contract and the agreement.
And I think that makes us all the more irrelevant. If we can't be viewed as an honest broker, if we can't even keep agreements that we sign, we become less and less relevant. But you know, we started the show talking a little bit about sports and how sports is such a wonderful opening to relieve tensions. And you discussed the fact that high-level dignitaries They'll have the sanctions against them suspended so they can go to the South Korea. They can watch the Olympic Games together. I think that is such an important part of the reconciliation process.
Now, I've used that, but I've used another example too, and this was an achievement that they need to do more of right now, and that is, when I was there, a few people know that I like to play baseball, and we played baseball against the Democrats. Turned out, if you played baseball with the Democrats, believe me, when you saw other baseball players on the House floor or whatever, you barely got into them on politics. There was something about it, but that baseball brought people together.
Yeah.
Ping pong brought some people together, and there's no reason why this can't be very beneficial. Now, Mattis is saying, no, we got to be careful, because what they're trying to do, since the United States is not attending, is North Korea is trying to drive a wedge between South Korea and the United States. Well, I wouldn't call it a wedge, but maybe a little distancing. You know, it would be a lot different than a wedge. I don't think we're likely to have a wedge and give up our commercial associations with South Korea and all the activity going on. But that may be their excuse to be loyal to the neocons. You know, you got to be tough, and therefore be suspicious that this is only to drive a wedge between South Korea and America.
Talk about thinking in zero-sum terms. You know, if somehow they get along, there's a wedge between the two of us. Why wouldn't we all benefit from it? And why shouldn't we be trading with North Korea? But you touched on earlier the fact that Trump is taking credit for it, and he's kind of beating his chest and saying, if I hadn't been so tough, they'd never be talking. And we sort of concede the point, okay, fair enough, fine. Take credit for it, that's fine. In fact, he may actually be right. It may actually be his doing, but in sort of an ironic way, because his bluster, his bombast, his making fun of Kim, his threats, I think, and other people have written this is not an original thought, but it may have pushed North Korea to really hasten the development of their missiles, to really speed things up to the point where they feel they have a sufficient deterrent to come to the table now. So ironically, he may have, with his bombast, encouraged and contributed to this kind of talk.
Yeah, and you can't write on off as being irrational. He's been rational in trying to do what's best for his survival and the country's survival. You know, Pompeo had a statement about this too. He was more in Mattis' camp. You know, hey,
Shocking.
watch out. This is not good. And he of course, has to go along with it to a degree. But the reporter asked him, he says, has the deep state influenced the CIA? I don't know whether you saw that.
I did.
And I thought, well, that is interesting, asking the deep state if they have the deep state influence. But that might be an over-exaggeration.
And he said, oh, no, not at all.
Yeah.
Well, I would, if I can just say a couple final words, I think it's good news. I'm glad we can do a good news story and have a smile on our face when we're doing it. I would say the best case scenario that come out of this is sort of a China scenario where if these talks do continue and the North and South get closer, maybe in the North the party will still play the leading role in society, as it does in China officially, but underneath you'll have percolations, you'll have these visits back and forth. The North will adopt some of the things in the South. Maybe they'll adopt more trade and they'll adopt a more market-based economy, which will lift the quality of life of people, and the party won't feel so threatened as the Chinese party doesn't feel threatened by the ship rising on all levels. And so that's probably the best we can hope for.
No, and I think that's a good outcome if that comes. And it looks like it could. I think that same type of scenario may be applied to Cuba. Cuba is not quite like 1958, 59, and the 60s and all that was going on. And the trading will open up with Cuba, even though there's a lot of resistance there. So I think that if you can just open the doors, just let people travel back and forth, let them trade, let them talk. And this is what the founders talked about. You know, if you trade with people, you're less likely to fight with people. This idea that you have to fight with people and tell them how to live and what to do and have all these conditions, that's the way you come to peace. You have to have peace through intimidation. It's exactly the opposite. So I think this is good. It also shows an example. You know, a lot of people would say, well, you libertarians, you're overly rigid, you want this. Of course we do. We define it, we know where we want to go, and we set the goals. But I, for one, I don't think that in the near future, all of a sudden the world's going to become libertarian. But if you don't have a libertarian non-aggressive principle, you can't even go in that direction, and that is the difficulty. And I think what we're seeing here is moving in the direction. It's not a compromise. It's not selling out one bit. It's describing what freedom does, and a non-aggressive principle of talking to people before you fight with people. And yes, it comes up, and it will be a mixture. And Daniel suggests that maybe they'll still be a communist party, just like in China. But the Chinese are pretty good capitalists. They're our bankers right now to a large degree. So they're doing pretty well. But I do believe in having a goal, having a principle, and setting it, and always going in that direction. And don't sell out the principle, but also bring people together when it's obviously they're coming this way, and they'll negotiate and talk. I think that is a big step toward peace and prosperity, not only for us, but for the world. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.